In February 2026, Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz closed and began laying naval mines across the shipping lanes. Within 9 days, the price of Brent crude oil had risen 30%. The world's largest container shipping companies, Hapag, Lloyd, Maersk, Mississippi Sea, suspended all transit operations. The United States repositioned 2 carrier strike groups to the region, and every economy on Earth, from China's manufacturing sector to Germany's chemical industry to the price of fuel at an ordinary gas station in Ohio, felt the consequence. All of it because of 24 miles of water. The Strait of Hormuz is 24 miles wide at its narrowest point. That is the distance between central London and its outer suburbs. It is less than the distance across the English Channel at its narrowest. It connects the Persian Gulf and the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, and Iran, to the Gulf of Oman and the open Indian Ocean. There is no other way out by sea, no alternative route, no bypass for the majority of the oil that flows through it. The world built its energy system around this gap. Then it gave one country, Iran, a coastline along its entire northern shore. In 2025, an average of 20 million barrels of oil per Dalton Y passed through the strait, roughly 20% of global petroleum consumption. Added to that, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas trade, primarily from Qatar, which has no alternative export route, and up to 30% of internationally traded fertilizers produced from Gulf natural gas and essential to global food production. When analysts calculate the economic value transiting this passage on any given day, the number exceeds $1 billion per hour, not per Dalton Y per hour. The Strait of Hormuz is the most economically concentrated geographic point on Earth. The shipping traffic operates through a traffic separation scheme, essentially a maritime highway system, recognized by the International Maritime Organization. There are 2 lanes, one inbound, one outbound. Each lane is exactly 2 miles wide. They are separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. The entire highway is 6 miles wide in total, crossing a passage that is 24 miles at its narrowest. Enormous tankers with a draft of up to 25 meters have very limited room to maneuver within these lanes. They cannot deviate suddenly from a mine threat without risk of grounding. They cannot accelerate out of danger. This physical constraint is precisely why the mining of the shipping lanes is such an effective military strategy. Only 2 pipeline alternatives exist to bypass the strait for any significant volume. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West pipeline, 5 million barrels per Dalton Y capacity, running from its Gulf fields to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. The UAE operates the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, 1.5 million barrels per Dalton Y, running to a terminal on the Gulf of Oman. Together, they can bypass approximately 3.5 million barrels per Dalton Y. The strait carries 20 million. Every other export from every other Gulf producer, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Iran, has no alternative route. The bypass capacity covers 17% of the problem. 83% has nowhere else to go. The Strait of Hormuz has been one of the world's most important trading corridors for at least 3,000 years, and possibly much longer. The ancient city of Hormuz, which gave the strait its name, was not on the island of Hormuz, but on the Iranian mainland, at a site now called Minab. It was a major entrepot of the ancient world, the point where Persian Gulf trade met the Indian Ocean routes. Merchants from India, Arabia, Persia, and East Africa converged here. The goods they traded, spices, silk, pearls, frankincense, copper, and indigo, moved through this passage centuries before the first oil well was drilled anywhere on Earth. The pearl diving economy of the Persian Gulf, which thrived for at least 4,000 years before oil was discovered, was centered on this strait and the waters surrounding it. Persian Gulf pearls were considered the finest in the world, exported to Rome, to India, to China, to medieval Europe. The pearl trade sustained coastal communities from Kuwait to Oman for generations. The discovery of oil in the 1930s did not immediately end the pearl economy. It was the Japanese invention of cultured pearls in the 1920s that did. By the time the oil age began in earnest, the pearl economy was already gone. Oil did not replace it. It replaced the emptiness that cultured pearls had already created. The Portuguese were the first European power to seize control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the speed and decisiveness of their intervention in 19,507 reveals how clearly they understood the strait's strategic value. Admiral Afonso de Albuquerque sailed into the Gulf, captured the island of Hormuz, and established a Portuguese fort that controlled the passage. He did not do this accidentally. He did it because the Venetian spice trade, which he was trying to bypass and destroy, ran through this strait. Hormuz was the point where Persian Gulf luxury goods entered the Indian Ocean trading network. Control Hormuz. Control the price of every luxury good reaching Europe. The Portuguese held it for a century. They were expelled by a joint Persian-English force in 1622. One of the earliest examples of a Western power and a Persian government cooperating militarily against a common commercial adversary. The modern history of the Strait of Hormuz as an oil choke point begins in the 1970s, when the oil shocks demonstrated to the world that the strait was not simply a geographic feature, but a strategic instrument. Iran's revolutionary government was the first to explicitly threaten to close it during the Iran-Iraq war tanker conflicts of the 1980s. The United States responded with Operation Earnest Will in 1987, reflagging Kuwaiti tankers under the American flag and providing U.S. Navy escorts through the strait. It was the largest convoy operation the U.S. Navy had conducted since WE. The precedent was established. America would use military force to keep the strait open. That commitment has governed every subsequent confrontation in the passage. In 1988, 1 year into Operation Earnest Will, the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 650-5, an Airbus A-5 carrying 290 civilians, mistaking it for an attacking military aircraft. All 290 people aboard were killed. The U.S. government initially misrepresented the circumstances of the shootdown. Iran has never forgotten. Every U.S.-Iran confrontation in and around the strait since 1988, every seizure of tankers, every drone attack, every naval harassment operation occurs in the shadow of that event. The strait's history is not just the history of oil. It is the history of the specific human cost of controlling the world's most consequential waterway. The strait's geography is what makes it strategically so powerful and so difficult to defend. Iran controls the entire northern coastline, approximately 1,000 miles of coast from which it can deploy anti-ship missiles, small fast attack boats, mines, and drones. That coastline is not flat and exposed. It is mountainous, heavily indented, with valleys, offshore islands, and elevated terrain that provides ideal concealment and launch positions for weapon systems. Iran's military strategists have turned the geography into an integrated anti-access and area denial system that American naval planners have been studying and worrying about for 4 decades. Iran controls 7 major islands inside or near the strait. Qeshm, Larak, Hormuz, Hengam, Abu Musa, and Greater and Lesser Tum are all Iranian. Though the UAE disputes the ownership of Abu Musa and the Tum Islands, which Iran seized from the Emirates in 1971, these islands are not simply territory, they are military positions. Qeshm Island is large enough to host airfields, naval bases, and missile batteries. Larak Island sits directly beside the main shipping lane. Hormuz Island is close enough to the narrowest point that artillery mounted on it could reach vessels in the channel. The islands are the key to Iran's ability to interdict shipping, even under significant military pressure from outside. Iran's primary weapons for closing the strait are 3: sea mines, anti-ship cruise missiles, and fast attack boats operated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Navy. Sea mines are the most strategically effective of the 3, cheap, easy to deploy, extremely difficult and time-consuming to clear, and psychologically devastating to commercial shipping insurance markets. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency estimated in 2019 that Iran possessed over 5,000 naval mines capable of rapid deployment via high-speed boats. Clearing a significant minefield from the Hormuz shipping lanes would take weeks under the best conditions and require specialized minesweeping vessels that most navies have only in small numbers. Bandar Abbas, Iran's largest port and its primary naval facility near the strait, sits at the mouth of the passage on the Iranian side. The city of nearly 600 people is both a major commercial port and a military base. The IRGC Navy's Strait of Hormuz operations are headquartered here, alongside the regular Iranian Navy. The city is also the terminus of the Trans-Iranian Railway, connecting the Gulf Coast to Tehran and the interior. Bandar Abbas is what the British called a strategic node, a point where commercial importance, military capability, and transportation infrastructure converge. Its position makes it both the most important Iranian city most Westerners have never heard of, and the central operational hub for every Iranian military action in the strait. The Musandam Peninsula on the south side of the strait, Oman's exclave, separated from the main body of Oman by UAE territory, is one of the most dramatic and least known geographic features in the entire Arabian Peninsula. Its fjord-like inlets, called khors, cut deep into the mountains. Its cliffs rise directly from the sea to heights of over 1,000 meters. It is the only place in the Arabian Peninsula where this kind of geography exists, and it is why the southern shipping lane runs primarily through Omani, rather than Iranian territorial waters, taking advantage of the deep water near the Musandam's dramatic coastline. We will return to its extraordinary landscape in the tourism segment. But first, the economics. The Strait of Hormuz carries more economic value in any given week than most countries produce in a year. In 2025, an average of 20 million barrels of oil per Dalton-Y transited the strait, representing approximately 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption. At an average oil price of $70 per barrel, that is $1.4 billion of oil per Dalton-Y. Added to this 20% of global LNG trade, primarily Qatar's exports of over 112 billion cubic meters per year, and up to 30% of internationally traded fertilizers, produced from Gulf natural gas and essential to global agriculture. The strait is not just an oil choke point, it is a food security choke point. The destinations for the oil and gas transiting the strait are overwhelmingly Asian. 84% of crude oil exports through the strait go to Asian markets. China receives approximately a third of its total oil needs through the strait, over 5 million barrels per Dalton-Y. India, Japan, and South Korea together account for another 35% of strait oil flows. This geographic distribution has a specific strategic implication. A closure of the Strait of Hormuz hurts Asian economies far more directly than it hurts American ones. Since the shale revolution, the United States imports only a small fraction of its oil from Gulf sources. But China's economy runs, in significant part, on oil that passes through this strait every day. The insurance market's response to Hormuz tensions is one of the clearest economic signals of the strait is strategic centrality. When Iran began boarding and harassing tankers in 2019, war risk insurance premiums for vessels transiting the strait increased by between 300 and 500% within weeks. In February 2026, when Iran declared the strait closed, Lloyd's of London marine war risk cover was suspended entirely for Hormuz-bound vessels. Shipping companies that had been paying approximately $50,000 per voyage in insurance premiums were suddenly unable to obtain cover at any price. The closure was not enforced by mines alone. It was enforced by insurance markets responding to the mine threat. The financial system closed the strait before the mines did. The global economic consequences of a prolonged Hormuz closure are modeled regularly by governments, central banks, and energy agencies. The IEA's most recent scenario analysis estimates that a complete 2-month closure would reduce global economic output by between 1 and 2% of GDP, the equivalent of the 2009 financial crisis impact, produced in 60 days. Oil prices would exceed $200 per barrel within weeks. Asian industrial production would begin declining within 3 to 4 weeks as strategic reserves were drawn down. Agricultural fertilizer shortages would emerge within 6 to 8 weeks, with potential food price consequences in import-dependent countries. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve of the United States, currently at approximately 393 million barrels, would cover approximately 4 months of replacement for American import losses alone. The global reserve system was not designed for a complete, prolonged Hormuz closure. Hormuz Island is one of the most visually extraordinary places in the world that almost nobody has visited. The island lies approximately 8 kilometers from Bandar Abbas, in the strait itself. What makes it unlike anywhere else on Earth is its geology. The island is composed of 60 different types of mineral, rich soil and rock, running in bands of red, orange, yellow, purple, white, and deep crimson. The red soil is so iron oxide rich that local residents have historically used it as a condiment, mixing it into bread and fish dishes. The combination of mineral colors against the deep blue-green Gulf water creates a landscape that photographers who reach it describe as unlike anything else they have encountered in the Middle East or anywhere else. Qeshm Island, the largest island in the Persian Gulf at approximately 1,500 square kilometers, contains the Hara mangrove forests, one of the most ecologically significant marine ecosystems in the Middle East. The Hara forests stretch across over 20 hectares of the island's coastline, providing habitat for migratory birds. Over 100 species have been recorded here, as well as fish nurseries, sea turtles, dolphins, and dugong. The mangroves are a UNESCO-designated protected area. Qeshm also contains the Valley of the Stars, a canyon landscape of eroded pillars and spires that local tradition holds was created by a meteorite strike. The geological explanation involves water erosion. The landscape is extraordinary either way. The Musandam Peninsula's fjord geography, the khors inlets, has made it one of the most sought-after dive and snorkel destinations in the Arabian Peninsula for those who know it exists. The waters of the Musandam khors contain coral reef systems, schools of fish, dolphins, whale sharks, and the extraordinary visibility of protected Gulf of Oman water that doesn't see the heavy shipping traffic of the shipping lanes. The cliffs rising from the khors are inhabited by mountain goats of a subspecies, found nowhere else on Earth. The traditional wooden tow trip through the Musandam fjords, leaving from the Omani town of Qeshm, is considered by experienced travelers to be among the most dramatic boat journeys in the world. It is also almost completely unknown outside specialist travel circles. The ancient city of Hormuz, on the Iranian mainland, near modern Minab, was described by Marco Polo in his travels as one of the great cities of the world. He visited in the 1270s and wrote of its extraordinary heat, its trading wealth, and its importance as a junction point between East and West. The Portuguese fort on Hormuz Island, built by Albuquerque in 19,507 and expanded over the following century, still stands today in substantial ruins, its red stone walls dramatically visible against the island's mineral landscape. The fort is one of the most historically significant Portuguese colonial structures in existence, and one of the least visited, given the practical difficulties of reaching an Iranian island in a contested strait. For those who reach it, the combination of the ruins, the mineral landscape, and the Gulf views is described as genuinely unlike any other historic site on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz has never been closed for an extended period in its recorded history, despite decades of threats and multiple crises. The 2026 crisis, which saw Iranian forces declaring the strait closed and attacking vessels, is the most serious challenge to transit freedom in the strait, is modern history. But even in 2026, the strait was not fully closed. Some vessels continued transiting, some cargoes continued moving, and the international pressure for a resolution was intense precisely because no global economy, including Iran's neighbors and trading partners, could absorb a genuinely prolonged closure. The strait's geography makes it the perfect weapon. It also makes its full closure too consequential for any rational actor to sustain indefinitely. The human story of the Strait of Hormuz is not the story of oil. It is the story of the people who have lived beside this water for 3,000 years. The pearl divers whose lungs and whose labor built the economies of the Gulf before oil existed. The Howe captains who navigated by stars across the Indian Ocean. The residents of Qeshm and Hormuz and the Musandam villages who have watched empires come and go from the shore of this passage. The strait's strategic centrality is a fact of geology and geography. The human civilization that built up around it is a fact of something else. The same thing that builds up around every important crossing point in human history: the need to meet, to trade, to move, and to understand. The Maritime Choke Point series will visit 5 more of these extraordinary passages: the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Turkish Straits of Bosporus and Dardanelles. Each one has its own strategic logic, its own historical depth, its own economic centrality, its own human story. Each one is currently under pressure from the same forces reshaping the global order: the transition from oil to new energy forms, the rise of China as a maritime power, the weakening of the post-Wei institutional architecture that governed global trade, and the specific confrontations of 2025 and 2026 that have demonstrated, once again, that geography is destiny. The next episode in this series, the Panama Canal, the 100-year-old engineering miracle that is now the center of one of the most consequential U.S.-China disputes of the decade. 24 miles of water, 3,000 years of history, 20% of the world's oil, 20% of its gas, 30% of its fertilizers. Every single day. Portuguese forts built from red mineral rock. Pearl divers whose lungs knew these waters before oil existed. Mangrove forests sheltering sea turtles in the shadow of naval bases. The same passage where Albuquerque planted his flag in 1507 is the passage where Iranian mines were laid in 2026. The geography has not changed. The strategic logic has not changed. Only the material at stake has changed, and even that, as this series will trace, is beginning to change again. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because the story doesn't end here. It evolves. 6 choke points, 6 episodes. The history, the economics, the strategy, and the human story of the passages that the world cannot afford to lose. The next one is coming. Don't miss it.